Let's see. So people can watch. Oh, someone was connected. I could hear their thing went off. So who else has another question before we start?
I have one question.
Yeah. What's the question?
Yeah, so you instructed not to blaspheme any
Vaishnava.
Vaishnava. Not doing that, but I still sometimes not happy with the activities that are done by some of the people.
So you could say, I'm not happy with the activities. That's not blasphemy. You know, in Christianity, there's this famous saying, you hate the sin and not the sinner. There's a difference between the two. In other words, someone does something, okay, you made a mistake, I'm not happy with what you do, but to call them a nonsense or mudha or worse, a rascal, it's not a good idea. Devotees shouldn't call each other names like that, yeah, or diagnose each other. It's just like, I don't agree with what you did. What you did is not really helpful, etc. Like, Hare Krishna. So that's the real point. But I try my best not to think negatively about anybody. It's always good to have like positive thoughts about people. Even if someone has done something really horrendous to you, I understand they've done something really horrendous, yes, but I'm not going to hate them. And, you know, I've had to deal with people who've done really horrendous things. Whatever. I mean, just like if you go on the internet, I mean, anybody who has any position anywhere in any organization is going to get criticized. So, you know, if I happen to inadvertently read those things, then I don't like it. It may be painful, but I don't hate the person. Like Krishna, it's described that Krishna sometimes feels pain when the demons blaspheme him because he wants their love, but he doesn't hate them. Samoham sarvabhuteshu nami dvesho stina priyaha. Krishna says, I don't have any special favorites, and I don't have any enemies, or people who I hate. And a Vaishnava is a Jata Shatara, right? That's really important. Like Yudhisthira Maharaj was called a Jata Shatru because he had no enemies. His enemy was never born. I don't think you could say that about Bhimsen. Bhimsen was not the king. Arjuna was like that too, you know. Arjuna was ready not to fight. Bhimsen was not ready not to fight. You know, he was ready to go. He had to be held back at every moment by Yudhisthira Maharaj. And Yudhisthira Maharaj, after the battle of Kurukshetra, he felt so guilty that he had caused all these disturbances and so many unprotected ladies and disturbances in society that he didn't want to take up the emperorship. So he had to be preached to by Vyasadeva and grandfather Bhishma just to convince him. He wasn't thinking, you know, oh, I got those rascals, I killed them, I taught them a lesson. So that's a problem when we think of people in a negative vein. And it actually creates negativity in our own hearts. Because once you get into this negative attitude, it pervades your entire consciousness. And then you start dealing with people in a very judgmental way. We judge, yes, but we judge the activities. But Prabhupada was never hateful. I mean, he's always extremely loving towards everybody. You hear these memories. I spend a lot of time listening to Prabhupada's memories. This is one thing I do when I take prasadam. I watch the Prabhupada memory videos. I think I've watched practically all of them by now. And you hear how loving Prabhupada was with everyone. I mean, practical, expert, daksha, but loving. He never hated anyone, so I think that's really important. So, it is past 7:50. I guess we should start now, right?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, so we start with a kirtan, or what do we start with? Yeah, kirtan. Okay. Let me put the microphone on. So, Hare Krishna. Okay, we're gonna have a kirtan. What should we chant? I guess Hare Krishna, right? Namah Shivaya Krishna Krishna Uttama Shivate Bhakti Vinamka Sameni Jaya Jaya. You tell me.
One Kirtan and then we can have class.
Okay. So okay, one Kirtan. So we'll do this in the Shingadik first. How we got the class? We'll chant Jai Radha Madhava before class. Go a little slow with this one. He always likes to speed up. Jaya Radha. The melody's a little different than you're used to. Just listen to it first, so you don't get confused. It goes Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunda Vihari. The second chorus. Gopi Jana Ballabha, Jaya Girivaradhare, Jaya Girivaradhare. Yashoda Nandana, Jaya Bhajajana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jaya Kunja Vihari, Jaya Kunja Vihari. Try to follow. Jaya Radha Vishnupad, Paramahamsa, Paramacharya, Ostutela, Sajashi, Shimad, His Divine Grace, Abhaya Chalana, Bhaktivedanta, Goswami, Srila Prabhupada, Jai, ISKCON Founder, Acharya, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti, Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya, Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadha, Shivasari Gaur, Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna, Gopi Gopinath, Sai Mukunda, Radhakunda, Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavanam Ki Jai, Mathuram Ki Jai, Jagadadha Swami Ki Jai, Manamari Ki Jai, Srimati Lasa Devi Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Gaur Puradananda Hari Hari. All glorious the assembled devotees, all glorious the assembled devotees, all glorious the assembled devotees, all glories to Shi, Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna, Kristaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Tinamani Namaste, Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Pacharni, Devashesha, Shunyavadi Paschachadesha Tarni, so Om Ganat Tivedandasha, Gadanjana Shivakya Chakshur Viditam, Yena Tasmai Shigarave Namaha. So I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who so kindly opened my eyes with the darkness, with the torch of knowledge while he's blinded in the darkness of ignorance. You were going to say something?
Well, I just wanted to welcome you.
Oh, welcome. So, welcome me. Okay.
So, because there are some families here
who haven't met me before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, we are very fortunate today. We have His Honor bkgoswami Goswami Maharaj. So, His Honor bkgoswami Goswami Maharaj, he met Srila Prabhupada in 1971. So, Prabhupada came to the West in 1965, and Maharaj met Srila Prabhupada in 1971. And since he, as soon as he met Prabhupada, he really got immersed in Srila Prabhupada's books. And then from 1972 onwards, Maharaj was involved with distributing Srila Prabhupada's books all over. And then later on, he got involved with publishing English and Spanish books. And after Srila Prabhupada departed in 77, in 78, Maharaj declared his complete dedication to Srila Prabhupada's life and mission by taking sannyas in 1978. And so, we see the example of Maharaj's dedication and commitment to Srila Prabhupada and his mission and his life. And then later on, Maharaj came here to North Carolina in 1982. At the time, there was no temple here in entire North Carolina. And Maharaj came and he saw this entire state, no temples at all. And Maharaj came single-handedly, and then he came, and then he actually started talking to people, starting preaching, and then he started this entire temple that we see in New Goloka. Maharaj single-handedly started the whole thing. And in 1985, the Sri Sri Radha Golokananda was actually installed. So Maharaj came here in 82, and 85 we had the opening of the temple and Sri Sri Radha Golokananda installed. So we see Maharaj's dedication and commitment to the service of Srila Prabhupada. And so wonderful, it's so inspiring to see Maharaj's life. And then in 85 the temple opened, and then this new Goloka Dham has been Maharaj's his base, but he travels all around the world. He has disciples in India, Australia, Fiji, New Zealand, all over the world. So Maharaj travels this pre-COVID Maharaj was traveling, all around the world. And then in 1995, Maharaj actually became a part of the ISKCON Gomni Body Commission, which is the main commission that manages the entire ISKCON society. And since then, Maharaj has been serving as a GBC member. We call it GBC, Gomni Body Commission. And Maharaj has been serving, with the entire, all worldwide ISKCON, managing the entire society. Maharaj is also initiating spiritual master. And many of you here are his disciples, so we are very fortunate. So anyone wants to connect more with Maharaj, Maharaj is here. Like he's going to India in February, but normally he's here. You can actually connect more, seek Maharaj's guidance. And Maharaj also every day 5 o'clock he does Zoom classes. He's reading Srila Prabhupada's books and explaining. So those are wonderful. So if you like to join, Maharaj has a separate WhatsApp group for that. So you can join Maharaj WhatsApp group and that way, continue seeking Maharaj association. So we are very, very grateful, Maharaj. You agreed to come here. It's like a long drive, 1 hour, and also Maharaj has a schedule, where he gets up very early in the morning. But these late night programs are difficult, but Maharaj very kindly accepted our request. So we are very grateful to Maharaj. So let's loudly welcome Maharaj by saying Hari Bol loudly. Hari Bol! Hari Bol!
Okay. Nice community you have here.
Just one more final.
All right.
The children normally they do separate class, but I'm thinking should they have the class or is it
It might be a little philosophical for you,
Okay,
but
so the small kids you can go to your class.
especially the 7th chapter of the Gita is not too many stories there.
Okay. So the children you can go to your Sunday.
Okay?
Should we pass on the Bhagavad Gita?
What?
Should we pass on Gita? No.
Yeah, you pass out the Gita to everybody.
Are you doing any tour this year?
How I do what?
Are you doing any tour this year?
Tour of India?
In
No.
Vrindavan.
Just Govardhan.
When are you doing that?
I'm going to be at Govardhan from the 15th of February till about the 24th.
Are you taking any disciples from there?
There's some going to be there with me, yeah. And what we do is we do a parikrama every morning of Govardhan. But I just stay in Govardhan. But the other devotees, they'll be going to other places in Braj. For myself, I just like to stay in Govardhan.
Any plans in December, Maharaj? For this
December?
December or November, any plans for you to do them?
December and November. Plans as far as what?
For again taking all the US devotees, again do you have any plans?
To India again? No, not
Not
December.
this year.
Not December.
The request is probably if you want some friends.
Mainly it's just Govardhan.
Please come all the way in front. You can come to here.
I used to do tours all over India, but right now I just go to Govardhan. These long yatras are a little exhausting. What we used to do was rent a bus and take it everywhere all over India. And it was very exciting, but to me it was like babysitting for 30 or 40 people. So I'll leave that up to the young people who do those yatras. Because there's an interesting thing, when we took a bus, we could stop at all the different places that people normally don't stop at. We didn't have to worry about train schedules. So we went to one place in Orissa that very few people, I don't know if anyone here has been to Ramuna. You've been to Ramuna? Nobody here has been to Ramuna. You've been one time to Ramuna.
We are from Bhubaneswar.
Oh, you're in Bhubaneswar. So you've been to Ramuna. So, it's very hard. The train stops there, but you're sort of stuck. It just stops there like once or twice a day. So we actually stayed overnight and did Mangalarti for Shirachara Gopinath in Ramuna, which is very exciting. But it was quite austere because I had to sleep on the bus right in front of the temple and take a bath in the middle of the street in the morning. It's something I don't think I'll do right now at this stage in life, but it was fun. It was actually a lot of fun. And then one day we stayed in the Dhamshala and we had the rats running on top of us at night. So when you're young, you can do all sorts of adventures, but right now, I don't know about that anymore. So anyway, so basically, to me, Govardhan encompasses all the holy places. And even in Braj, the rest of Braj, you'll find representatives of the rest of the holy places. You'll find Lakshman Julan there in Braj. You'll find all the, and it's amazing, you Bhadravika Ashram in Braj. You've been, of course, in Bhadravika Ashram in Braj. And all the holy places in India are actually present within the Vrindavan Braj area. So I've had that realization. So at this point, I let the other younger people, they just go all over. And I just stay in Braj and chant Hare Krishna and circumambulate Govardhan and roll on the dust of Govardhan. How about that? So when we go to Govardhan, we actually roll in the dust. Actually, it's not just sand, actually. And that sand has the particles of the devotees' lotus feet. I mean, devotees' imprints, pure devotees, the gopis, and the other residents of Vrindavan. So, should we get on with the Bhagavad Gita?
Yes.
So I have my summary, that's why I have this piece of paper here, which is a summary of the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is called The Knowledge of the Absolute. Now, I understand you just finished the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So, 6th chapter is sometimes called Sankhya Yoga. I call it just the Yoga chapter. Because it deals with a lot more than Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya Yoga, just to describe what Sankhya Yoga is, the word Sankhya means to count. Did you all know that? You learned that. And it doesn't mean simply, count to 10 or count to 20 or something like that. It means to elaborate on the material elements. And of course, the main author of the Sankhya philosophy is Lord Kapila. And he analyzed like the earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego, and the senses, the perceptive senses, the active senses, the sense objects, and comes about 24 of all these different elements. So, and there's also an atheistic Sankhya philosopher named Kapila, an imitation Kapila. So that's generally what Sankhya philosophy is. And interesting, we were talking about this the other night in our class, that the scientists, they actually do a type of Sankhya philosophy too. Like when I was in university and even high school, we studied the periodic table of elements. Anyone study the periodic table of elements? Chemistry, chemistry. And that's a type of Sankhya. You're actually elaborating or counting the material elements. It's also atheistic Sankhya. So, but the whole point is we're interested in theistic Sankhya. And the interesting thing, the reason the 6th chapter is called Sankhya is when we're talking about the different darshans, there's actually 6 darshans. Sankhya is intimately connected with yoga. They come in pairs. There's 6 of them and they come in pairs. So the Sankhya and yoga are together. So the word yoga literally means to connect one with the absolute. It comes from the Sanskrit word root, yuj, which means connection. And so, of course, viyoga means disconnection, and yoga means connection. Oh, we got more people coming. So the 6th chapter actually deals with aspects of Sankhya, but I think more with the Hatha yoga system than it does with Sankhya. But although they're considered a pair anyway, so I guess that's where you get the name Sankhya Yoga for the 6th chapter. And in the 6th chapter we find Krishna, I'm just giving you a summary of the 6th chapter before we go to the 7th. Krishna is actually giving Arjuna all these different procedures that have to be followed if one is going to follow the Hatha yoga system. Nowadays, of course, people think the Hatha yoga system means a series of asanas, or maybe pranayam, and that's about it. But it involves 8 activities, beginning with yam and then niyam. You probably described this
Yes,
last. Yam means restrictions, and if you don't follow restrictions, you see Yamaraj. Right? Yamaraj. He's the king of restrictions, basically. Yamaraj. Anyway, so it's quite complicated. And then Arjuna, of course, says, as we go through the 6th chapter, that what Krishna is asking him to do is impossible. Chanchala himana har Krishna pramati balivadridam tashaham nigraham mani vayo eva shadushkaram. The mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, and more difficult than controlling the wind. And Krishna answers, you can do it by practice. And then finally, Krishna in the 47th verse of the chapter, he says the best yogi is the bhakti yogi. Yogi nam api sarvesham madhyate nantaratmanam shravaham tapam pashate yomam samai tatmamadaha. I consider the bhakti yogi to be the topmost. And so then going into, each chapter follows, the next chapter that follows actually follows the same train of thought. That's why I'm talking about the 7th chapter. So in the 8th chapter, 7th chapter. Of course, let's skip ahead to the 8th chapter. Krishna talks about the benefit of remembering him. Right? Because if you remember him at the time of death, then you go to him. Or Krishna gives the general instruction, yam yam vabi smaran bhavam yashate ante kalebram. That whatever you're thinking of at the time of death, that's where you go. And so, in the 7th chapter, Krishna actually gives us ways to think of him. It's interesting. And he starts off the chapter, I divided the chapter into various topics in my notes here. He starts off the chapter by introducing the topic of the whole chapter. He says, by practicing yoga, he's referring to yoga right now, in full consciousness, you can know him free from doubt. And then Krishna gives what's called Sambandha Jnana in this chapter. Now, there's 3 aspects of transcendental knowledge. The 3 aspects are what we call Sambandha Jnana, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Some of you may be familiar with that. I'll define them. Sambandha means basic knowledge of who Krishna is, who the Jiva soul, what the Jiva soul is, what the material energy is, what time is, what karma is, etc., and what the spiritual energy is. These are called tattvas. Tattva means something that exists. It's a category of something that's eternal and exists. Basically, the word tattva means thatness. If you define it directly in Sanskrit, it means thatness, but thatness which is eternal. Like this table is not a tattva, but the energy from which it's composed, the material energy, wood is not a tattva either, but the basic material energy, which starts with the pradhana, or the unmanifest stage of the modes of nature, is a tattva, because that is eternal. The material energy, is eternal, but sometimes bhutva paliyate. Sometimes it's manifest, sometimes it's not. Like this is manifest as a table, but then after some time, of course it's not, maybe it's not wood, there's some metal here. But anyway, after some time, there'll be just the metal and the wood. And after some time, the wood will burn, and it'll change into some other element. And after some time, it will become unmanifest as the pradhan, the unmanifest stage of the modes of nature. So it's a manifestation of the tattva. Does everybody understand? And the soul is the jiva soul is one of the tattvas too. And of course, Krishna is what's called Vishnu tattva. He's the original Vishnu Tattva, Ete Changsa Sa, Krishna's two Bhagavan Swayam. And so, anyway, so these are the different tattvas. So Krishna describes knowledge about himself, which is the tattva in this particular chapter. Actually, in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we find the Jiva Soul's tattva being described. Isn't it? Nijayate mriyate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita va vibhuyaho. Let me know if I'm getting too philosophical here. Is this how you usually have classes here? Or should I tell more humorous things or something? I mean, I could do that too, but I'm just wondering how philosophical I should be here.
I think it's very nice.
Everyone likes to hear it like this? Anyway, I try to present it very simply. So, anyway, so here we find Krishna. Who is Krishna? Because, Krishna wants to advocate in the 8th chapter that someone should think of him at the time of death. So you got to know what to think of. Like Prabhupada would often say, if you want to love God, you have to know him. And Prabhupada would sometimes say, we know his name, address, and telephone number. And if Prabhupada was here today, he'd say we know his email address and his web address too. Facebook. www.krishna.com. So, but you really have to know about someone to love them. So Krishna here really starts presenting himself. And this 7th chapter begins like the nectar chapters of the Gita. Sometimes it's described by some of the acharyas, many of the acharyas, that the first 6 chapters are like basically introduction, and then you get into the middle 6, which are like the filling in those Oreo cookies. You ever, an Oreo cookies,
Yeah.
or a sandwich or something like that. So you get the last 6, first 6 and the last 6 are like the bread, and then what's inside. I mean, it's all nectar. I mean, it's good bread. So it's all nectar. But now you get into really, who is Krishna? And, I mean, of course, Krishna in this chapter is not talking about his intimate pastimes in Vrindavan. So someone may question, I want to get to the real nectar, which is Krishna dancing with the gopis. But really, if you love Krishna, you'll love everything he does. And if you don't, if you think you love Krishna, then you only love those things that remind you of your own sense gratification. That's the difference between sahaja and someone who's actually a devotee. Sahaja, the word sahaja means someone who takes things cheaply. So the reason people jump up to Krishna's Rasa Leela without understanding or appreciating the other things that Krishna does is because it stimulates their own material desires. It's really interesting. And that's why you find in many of these Bhagavad Saptas, they'll just concentrate on the Rasa Leela or the Vrindavan pastimes. But I love everything Krishna does. Just like, of course, one of my favorite verses is in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, 6:30. Yomam pashati sarvatra sarvam chamayi pashati tashaham na pranashami sachame na pranashati. The one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me is never lost to me, nor am I ever lost to him. So, a devotee, he sees Krishna everywhere. Also in the Brahma Samhita we have this verse, Premanjana Churti Bhakti Vilochanena. Santakshadaiva Hridiyeshu Vilokiyanti Yam Shamashandramachinchi Gudaswaravum Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. That the devotee, his eyes are tinged with the salve of love of God. He sees Krishna everywhere. That doesn't mean, you just see little Krishnas jumping around. Wow, there's Krishna playing his flute right by the door, No, it means you see this belongs to Krishna. Like you see someone's car, you see someone's shoes, it reminds you of the person. So if I see this energy and I see how wonderfully it's acting, we were talking about this before class, then it becomes an impetus for loving Krishna. It's Krishna. Krishna says in one sense, I'm everything. Also, Ham Sarvasya Prabhu Matak Sarva Prabhartate. Everything comes from me. So anyway, so a devotee likes to hear these other things in the 7th chapter about Krishna. Not simply because it helps him preach or it just gives him a little philosophy. But it's Krishna. So, anyway, so Krishna starts, he says, practicing the yoga, referring to the 6th chapter of the Gita. Full consciousness of me, mind attached to me, you can know him in full, free from doubt. That's his introduction. So then he's going to tell us how he's going to allow us to think of him all the time. And then the first thing Krishna says, actually, if you're thinking of me, then basically you will know all phenomenal and noumenal or numinous knowledge. That means all knowledge that you can perceive and all knowledge that you can't perceive, spiritual knowledge. And beyond that, there's nothing else. And I'm going to give you this knowledge. And this knowledge is not different from me. But I'm giving you something very rare, he says to Arjuna. Because out of thousands of men, Manushanam Sahasreshu Kastin Yatati Siddhaya Yatatam Abhisinanam Kastin Mam Vedi Tatvata. Hardly anyone's looking for perfection, and out of those who have achieved perfection, hardly anyone knows Krishna in truth. Of course, by perfection, Krishna means understanding other aspects of the Absolute, like Brahman, the light. We were talking about this tonight. We were giving a class in the Upanishad. So the other day we were talking about what is the Brahman effulgence? Well, it's the light of Krishna. But it's also composed of all these different jiva souls. It's all these little tiny jiva souls swimming around in a state of coma. Real blissful, isn't it? In a coma. Yeah, I remember when I had an operation last year. I wasn't in bliss. It was just, it wasn't coma, but it was anesthesia. But people perceive the Brahmajyoti as just one light. And the example I gave is these modern lights, the LED lights, that if you look at one bulb, LED bulb, sometimes there's many different LEDs within that LED bulb. And it just appears because of the frosting over the top of it, it's just one light. So that's the Brahmajyoti. So that's perfection for some people. Because for devotees, that's considered hell, just to realize the Brahmajyoti. Kaivalya Nadakayate, because there's no relationships. And then the second type of perfection is the Paramatma perfection, that God is in everyone's heart, 4 arms, giving you intelligence, remembrance, and forgetfulness. And then the third type is Bhagavan realization. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattva yadyanamantaya. Brahmeti paramapmeti Bhagavan iti shabdyate. That's 3 aspects of the Absolute Truth. So very few know about Krishna. So the question is, why do we know about Krishna? If very few, it looks like a lot of you know about Krishna. Does that mean you're all great yogis? Yes. That's the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his servant Srila Prabhupada. Because if it wasn't for Prabhupada, basically, many of you, of course, from India, you think, there's many gods, the gods. Of course, it's easy to understand that Krishna's God because he's the only one who doesn't have to work, right? He's the only one who gets to play his flute with his girlfriend all the time. Everybody else has to do something, but very few people understand that. They understand that anyway, someone else is God. So it's very, very rare. Krishna makes this point, and And then he goes on to talk more about himself, how everything is spiritual, material, I mean, it's both its origin and dissolution, and there's nothing superior to me. And everything rests on me, even though you don't see me. He says, just like everything rests. That's all right, it doesn't bother me. I'm used to it by now. We go to school at the temple. And they're worse at the temple. They're squeaking all the time. So they're the real little kids. So everything rests upon me in the same way, even though you don't see me, just like the pearls upon a thread. It's a tightly wound necklace. You don't see the thread underneath. It just looks like the pearls are touching each other like that. So after Krishna describes himself in general, then he describes how to see Krishna, how to see us in this world. What's the connection to Krishna with this world? And he starts with talking about the material elements, the earth, water, fire, air, ether, Bhumi, Rupo, Analo, Vayu, Kamana, mind, intelligence, false ego, that are his separated energies. His material energy. There's a material energy, spiritual energy, Vishnu Shakti, Para Prokta, Jaichagya Para, Vijayakarma Sanganya Shruti Shakti Ishute. That Krishna has basically three types of energies, material, spiritual, and we're called marginal. Because we can go either way. We have a choice. So here Krishna is talking about the material energies, how to see him. And then he gives more practical instructions. He said, you can understand me by the taste of water. Prabhupada actually said that. You can actually drink water. And if you remember that the taste is Krishna, you can become Krishna conscious. That's pretty good, interesting. Prabhupada even said jokingly that even the alcoholic, not that you shouldn't try this, when he tastes the liquid, the alcohol, he thinks that taste is Krishna. In between each drink, something like that. But I don't suggest that. Then you see Krishna behind it. Or you see the light of the sun or the moon, which is described elsewhere as like a reflection of the Brahmajyoti. And this light of the sun and the moon provides all heat and energy within this world. Because if you do away with the sun, let's say the sun stops shining, then basically everything goes to almost absolute zero. Kelvin, but basically not absolute zero Fahrenheit. So anyway, and then everything stops. There's no motion, no nothing in the material world. So, and then Om is his representative. Sound, this manifest sound comes in ether, and even someone's ability. Like if you see someone who's strong, or if you see someone who's very intelligent, that's from Krishna. Of course, later on, as far as intelligence, Krishna in the 15th chapter talks about Matakshmitir Jnanam Aponam Cha. And then you can understand Krishna, goes on later, talking about how Krishna is the fragrance. Because the sense of smell comes from the earth element. Each of the different elements manifests a different type of sense perception. Isn't it? Smell, the ether is sound vibration. And if there's heat and fire, someone's life, or someone's executing penances, all from Krishna. In other words, whatever you see is Krishna. Krishna is giving us a practical way to see everything in connection with him. And he's the seed of all existences. He's pretty much repeating some of the things. Strength of the strong, sex life that is actually meant for procreation, modes of nature. But he also makes the point that he manifests all these different energies in the modes of nature. He's not under the modes of nature. He's still transcendental. Because all of Krishna's energies are his servants. They're all personified. I guess that's all right. That's what Tulsi had for me. So, the material energy, spiritual energy, they're all persons. And they're being directed by those persons. And those persons serve Krishna according to his will. This is pretty amazing. And they're all first-class servants of Krishna, so he doesn't have to tell them what to do. Therefore, Krishna can be independent and enjoy, ultimately, in Goloka Vrindavan with his associates. And then he describes how the whole world is deluded by the modes of nature, but he's above the modes. And these modes are very difficult to overcome, but they can be overcome by surrendering and approaching him. And then he gives this ultimate understanding of his intelligence or his knowledge. He says, I know everything, past, present, and future. Now this is an interesting question because many devotees have raised this question to me. They say, if Krishna knows everything in the future, does that mean there's no free will? That's a question that people raise. In other words, I have no choice. I'm forced to act in a certain way. And, it's interesting because it appears to be a contradiction between free will and Krishna's knowledge of the future. Because if you say Krishna doesn't know the future, then he's not God. He's no longer omniscient. One of the qualities of God is that he knows everything. So how does that contradict, or how can you reconcile the apparent contradiction between Krishna's knowledge of the future and your free will? Because Krishna gives us this ability. Well, I explained it very simply in this way, that we choose what we're going to do, but Krishna knows which way we're going to choose. Just because Krishna knows doesn't mean that we didn't chose it. You understand? Krishna knows that we're going to choose. Like Krishna knew that I chose to come here tonight. I could have chosen not to come here. But Krishna knew, and he knows. And also Krishna is beyond time. Time is one of his energies. He's beyond the cause and effect. Therefore he's called Sarva Karana Karanam. Ishwara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. He's the cause of all causes. So he's beyond time, beyond material energy, everything. He's beyond. And that's really answers how the material energy was created. Because people talk about, the scientists talk about the Big Bang. Before the Big Bang, there wasn't any time, or there wasn't any space, or anything. So how did something come from nothing unless there was something or someone who was beyond time and space? And that's Krishna. Okay. So then after Krishna talks about the material energy which has past, present, and future, then Krishna says besides this material energy, there are the jiva souls, which are, according to the Vishnu Purana, Kshetragyakya Tata Para. They're the knowers of the field of activities, Kshetragya, and they're also transcendental. As we said before, they're marginal. We are marginal, so we can choose matter or spirit. But we're also by nature transcendental or spiritual. He says the jiva souls, but the jiva souls right now are struggling with this material energy and the senses, like that. Aparemitas twanyam praktim vidi me param jiva bhutam abho yedam daryate jagat. That's the verse. There's the jiva souls. And then Krishna gets into describing amongst those jiva souls who comes to him and who doesn't come to him. Actually, you can see how Krishna presents everything very systematically in this chapter. When you go through these different categories, which I do, it's amazing. So he says, the people who don't come to him, the mam duskritina muda prapajante naranama maya pritigyana sodabha mashrita. These duskritinas are described, that means bad actors, are described as, just foolish mudhas who just engage in fruitive pursuits, like an ass. Lowest of mankind, it means like really uncultured people. It's not a racial designation. It's not like we're saying Aborigines or Adivasis. People misunderstand that sometimes. We're talking about the Adivasis of India. No, we're not. It's a cultural designation. Because one can actually change their culture too. Naranama means lowest of mankind. Mayaya pritigyana, those whose knowledge is stolen by illusion. And surambhav mashrita, those are out and out atheists. So Krishna describes those who don't come to him. And then later on, actually, let me talk about the people who don't come to Krishna first, before we talk about the people who come to Krishna. Because even though it's mixed in the verses, because after Krishna talks about the people who don't come to him, then in the 16th verse he talks about the people who do come to him. But I'm going to just divide it in different categories here, rather than go step by step through the chapter. Then Krishna talks about, as far as those who don't come to him, he says these people who don't come to him, he said they're stupid. Sorry. Because they think that Krishna has assumed his personality and form. They don't know his higher nature. That's one reason. And he says, Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavata. Actually, there's so many important verses in this chapter. It's one of the most important chapters as far as memorizing verses. Naham prakasha sarvasya yogamaya samavata. I'm not manifest to these foolish people because I cover them with my potency. Of course, here Krishna says yogamaya, which is generally understood as the internal potency, but the external potency is a manifestation of the internal potency. It's an expansion. So just like Krishna says, I cover them, that doesn't mean he's doing it directly. In the same way, when Krishna says yogamaya, it doesn't mean it's yogamaya, the spiritual potency is doing it directly, but the spiritual potency's expansion is the material energy is doing it directly. And then, going ahead, Krishna talks about who does come to him. And Chaturveda Bhajantimam. He talks about 4 types of people who come to him. Those are those who are looking for wealth, come to him. Not only money, but those who are looking for something to enjoy in this world. If someone wants any sort of opulence or enjoyment in this world. Those who are in distress, that's a big one. A lot of people come to Krishna when they're in distress. But you're going to see those who come to Krishna when they're in distress, those who come because they want wealth, those who come they're inquisitive, they can give it up pretty quickly. Because as soon as you get the wealth, you forget about Krishna. Why? Janma Ishvarya Shutasha Shibir Edamana Adapuman. As Queen Kunti says, we get bewildered by these things. Any sort of opulence. If we have good birth, so-called good birth that we can be proud of, wealth, learning, beauty, all these different things just bewilder the soul. So you see those who come to Krishna for those things, they very easily drop Krishna consciousness when they get those things. And then also those who come relief from distress, they easily can drop Krishna consciousness when their distress is gone. Or those who come, because they're inquisitive, as soon as their curiosity is satiated, they can give up. But Krishna says the one who comes to him for knowledge is considered the best. Because that person will always want to increase his knowledge about Krishna, and that person has it fixed that he wants to be Krishna conscious, because that's the goal. I remember the basic reason I came to Krishna consciousness is because I wanted to understand God, and I wanted to serve God. I mean, the prasadam was nice too. Obviously, if they had given me something bad tasting, I don't know if I would have stuck around. But it was, I came because I was praying to God. I didn't know who God was, but I was praying, dear God, let me understand you. Let me come to you. Let me serve you. So that was my intention, and I think that's why I've stayed all these years. Because, basically you get many tests as you're going along in spiritual life. And, you may get some material happiness or material opulences. Of course, I think I gave up all my material opulences. Become a devotee. My father tried to bribe me into giving it up. He said, at those days, they said, I'll give you $100,000 if you give it up. In those days, $100,000 is equivalent to $1 million today. So imagine someone offered you $1 million. Don't chant Hare Krishna anymore. Here's $1 million. Anybody? I think everybody's afraid to admit it. So anyways. Anyway, it's as long as you have to be fixed. Of course, in the beginning, in the second chapter of the Gita, Krishna talks about this. Ekeha Kurunandana, right? Vyavasayatmaka buddhya ekeha kurunandana bhoshabdas swanantasya. That those who are fixed in that purpose, their purpose is one, and they're one-pointed. So they're always remembering their strategic mission statement. Isn't it? There's like a successful company, they have a strategic mission statement, and they remain fixed on it. Like any successful, we were studying what it was about Starbucks, a unique coffee experience. Don't ask me what that means. I never liked coffee. I never took it. So, but you have to have a. So that's Ekeha Kurunandana, and those people who are that Ekeha Kurunandana, they remain in Krishna consciousness. The Prabhupada would often say, "Don't be surprised with who leaves. Be surprised with who stays." Because, well, of course, even if one makes a little progress, Krishna says in the Gita, Swapam apyasya dharma shatrayate mahatobhayat, that you're saved from losing everything completely. I mean, most likely you become a human being, unless you make the same mistake Bharat Maharaj did. But at least Bharat Maharaj remembered everything from one lifetime to another. So he didn't lose any of his devotional service. He was a pretty Krishna conscious deer. That deer just stayed in the ashram of the sages and remained with the sages the whole time. So anyway, what I see after all these years I've been trying to help people become Krishna conscious is that I'm happy if I can just start people on the path of Krishna consciousness. I used to get frustrated when people didn't stay. People deviate. I used to think, there's something wrong with me? Guilt and everything like that. Nowadays, I'm just happy, they engage in Krishna consciousness for a few years. They're saved. I mean, like you see, Prabhupada initiated so many people. Not everybody remained fixed on the path. Although, we do experience that they do come around when they're getting ready to die. Which is really interesting. So Krishna never forgets his Kontiya Pratijanihi. Name Bhakta Pranashati. Krishna never forgets his devotee. So anyway, so the wise person in full knowledge is the best according to Krishna and is very dear to Krishna. And he dear to Krishna and Krishna is dear to him. And Krishna really talks about that wise person. He says all devotees are very magnanimous, but those who are situated in knowledge, that means they're really fixed on attaining Krishna, the goal is attaining Krishna consciousness. They dwell in him, serve him, and attain him. That means, and this stage of being in knowledge is attained, another important verse, after many, many births and deaths. Bahunam janmanamante, janmamam bhajate vasudeva sara, niti sa mahatma sudurlabha. They come to the understanding that Krishna is everything. Vasudeva Sarvamiti, which means that everything comes from Krishna, everything belongs to Krishna. Like if you study this Upanishad, which we've been doing recently, Isha Vashamidam Sarvam Yatkancha Jakajam Jagat. The first two verses actually deal with this. Om Purnam Purnam. That everything, the Supreme Absolute Truth is perfect and complete, and so many complete units come from him. And then also everything is owned and controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And everything is meant to be used to serve him. Everybody's given a quota insofar as serving him. So, and Krishna really says that only one can be determined who is acting piously. Yesham Twandagatam Pampam, Yananam Punyakarmanam, Tidwandabo, Vajantimam Dridavata. Because you have to really be free of sin in order to be Dridavata and intelligent. And intelligent, he really goes through, there's actually 7 verses where he glorifies intelligent people, or people who are fixed in the goal of Krishna consciousness. He said, intelligent want liberation from old age, take refuge. They're Brahman because they know about transcendence and fruitive activities. And ultimately these intelligent people know that Krishna is the Lord. He's in charge of the material world. He is behind the demigods. He sustains everything. And if you think like that, you can know Krishna at the time of death. So this is basically, that's the last verse. But actually there's other topics too, which I'll cover in a second. Like I said, we're not going through the chapter verse by verse, we're going through topic by topic. So the last verse, Krishna leads into the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So one who knows Krishna as the Lord, he's in charge of the material world, he's behind the demigods, sustaining sacrifice, and you can have a steady mind and you can think of Krishna at the time of death. Just the other 2 topics dealt with here are the worship of the demigods and the living entities in the material world. These are, I'm presenting not step by step, but these are verses 20 to 23 about worship of the demigods. Krishna devotes 4 verses to the worship of the demigods. He says, those whose minds are distorted by material desires, they surrender to the demigods and worship them according to their own natures. But then Krishna reveals that he gives those people intelligence like faith in the demigods. He said, I'm in everyone's heart, and if one desires to worship a demigod, I make his faith strong. So Krishna is the source of faith, the source of intelligence. So even if someone is worshiping the wrong thing or deviant, Krishna is giving that intelligence and faith how to do that. But he says such a person with this faith worships the demigods, but he should understand it's all coming from me. And the fruits are temporary, and it's really less intelligent. And the problem is they go to the demigods at the time of death. Now you might think that's nice to go to the demigods because those are the heavenly planets. And Swarga is quite a nice place. Because there's no old people there. I guess they wouldn't let me there. So there's no old people, there's no crying kids. As soon as someone is born or appears, full grown. No babies. No. For some of you ladies, that would be like hell. But for me, it would be a dream come true. So with no crying, especially when I'm flying in an airplane. And usually I have the bulkhead seat, and that's where the bassinets are, and everything like that. What do you call it? And you get these crying babies. And actually, it's interesting. I was just speaking to one of my doctors, is a lady, and she was telling me she was going on a trip she'll never go on again with the baby because the baby was crying the whole time. And everyone was looking at her like she was a demon. So there's no crying babies. There's no disease. The only problem is what Shuni Punya Marcha Lokam Vishanti, that when your good karma runs out, you come back here. Your garland starts to fade. Everyone looks at you a little strange, and then you're back on the earth planet to accrue more karma. Good karma. So basically, Krishna says the fruits are temporary. As soon as karma's gone, you're gone too. And so, better to come to him. He says, my devotees come to me. And so that's the information about the demigods. And then just a little information about the jiva souls born into this world. He says they're born into delusion and hate, basically. If someone's born into this world, at least normal birth is you're born in illusion. And because you're in illusion, then you're going to hate some things and like other things based upon your own illusory perception of the world. And so that's the 7th chapter in a nutshell. We cover the whole 7th. Now we can go into the 8th chapter. We finished the whole Bhagavad Gita tonight. So, any questions? Well, yes.
So you mentioned that Krishna, after you progress, you'll never lose it. So it's kind of like a safety net. So how does someone keep growing when they know that it's easy to just say, I've already come so far.
Yeah.
I'll just do it the next lifetime.
But you may not do it next lifetime.
Yeah.
It may take 100 lifetimes before you come back to that point.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't lose it, but you may forget it for a long time. Maybe 1,000 lifetimes. Like that. You don't lose it. And of course, it depends on your own desire, and it depends on whether someone has committed offenses. By committing offenses, you become, not you, of course, I'm just speaking rhetorically here. Someone becomes even more covered up, but you don't lose it. So yeah, just like if I give you $1 million and say, you can keep the $1 million, but I'll give it to you 10 lifetimes from now. I'll give it to you when you're 80 years old, you remember where it is. That's not very encouraging, is it?
No, not really.
Yeah, you never lose it, but you may lose sight of it for some time. So that's important. Swapamapya Shidarma Shuchayate Mahato Bayat frees you from the most likely you'll take a human birth, with rare exceptions. So, but there's plenty of miserable humans on this planet. I mean, sometimes people, one time they asked Prabhupada, is there a hell? And Prabhupada happened to be in London, and he said, yes, London is hell. But seriously speaking, if you look at perhaps billions of human beings on this planet are suffering almost like a hellish condition. There's so many human beings who don't have adequate water. There's so many human beings who are in the midst of a war zone. There's so many human beings that at any moment they can get killed or kidnapped. I just heard some news that in certain countries a whole bunch of girls got kidnapped. And so, we're living in America where we're very fortunate. But even if you look at so many, over 1 billion people in the world are suffering tremendously, and it's almost like a hellish situation. So, if you think hell doesn't exist, even on this Earth planet, there's hellish situations. So, it's real. It's real. And someone may say, why has God permitted this to happen like that? Well, Krishna is trying to bring each and every soul close to him. And this material world is compared to a prison house. And in a prison house, sometimes prisoners have to be put into certain, as heartless as that may sound, have to be put in certain circumstances so that they will become rectified, or at least protect others from him. Krishna's punishments, or the administration of karma, is not done for the sake of punishment per se. It's done for the sake of rectification. If you've ever studied justice, systems of justice in this world, there's two types, two theories, that is. There's retributive justice and restorative justice. Retributive justice is you want to punish someone to make them suffer for what they did. Restorative is you want to bring them back to the right frame of consciousness. So Krishna's administration of the law of karma is restorative. So if someone is suffering, or the animal is suffering in different conditions like that, it's to restore them to the right frame of consciousness ultimately. So one may question, but I don't remember how I was punished in the past, isn't it? That's another question people raise. I don't remember how I was punished, so how can I be... Also, I don't remember what I did bad in the past. So how can I be punished for something I don't remember? That's a good question. The point is, the reason you did something bad in the past is because of improper mentality, which is in the subtle body. And the punishment or the reward is meant to deal with that subtle body, to rectify that consciousness. So you don't necessarily have to remember what you did or what lesson you learned to have learned the lesson. The example I give sometimes is that we all know how to talk, hopefully, or walk, but we don't remember how we learned to talk or walk. It's impressed in of course, the brain and the subtle body. So, anyway, the material world is a cruel place. It's a very cruel place. When I read about the sufferings in the news, it's just like, I just want to help people. But then I understand the best way to help people is to help them with Krishna consciousness so that they can rectify their mentality. And it reminds me of a story in the Ramayana where Ravan, you know who Ravan is, Ravan went to Yamaraj to challenge him. And when he went to Yamaraj to challenge him, the first thing he did is he freed all the people who were suffering there. He attacked the Yamadutas. He was so powerful. He didn't actually defeat Yamaraj. Yamaraj withdrew because he was told by Lord Brahma, you're not supposed to kill him. because he has this benediction that he can't be killed by demigods or powerful yakshas and things like that. So he has to be killed by a human being. So, but it's interesting. They were freed temporarily, but as soon as Robin went away, they got back to the punishments. So the only way to alleviate someone or relieve them is to give them Krishna consciousness. It's a really cruel place, this world. And even if you live, full life and nice material life, then ultimately, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. It's cruel. It's cruel. I mean, and there's lessons to be learned. And I learn these lessons every day as I'm getting older. You're young, you think everything is wonderful and got a whole life ahead of me and I'm healthy. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I just see Krishna behind it. I mean, just like today, I see this bandage on the ear. So that's because they did a biopsy on something on the ear today. And I'm thinking, it's my body. What happened? What happened to my youth? But I see Krishna there. I'm learning from that. Devotee can learn from disease, even his own diseases. So, that blissful thought. Anyways, so any questions, other questions or comments? Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
It was a very nice lecture. You approached the philosophical perspective, but then you went back to the basics, a lot of basics, and you answered a lot of frequently asked questions.
Yeah.
So I have one question. So you talked about how there's 4 people who approach Krishna,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them was the inquisitive one.
Yeah.
So the inquisitive one, he gets the knowledge, but then he goes away, as you said.
Yeah.
But then you said one who wants knowledge, he stays with Krishna.
Yeah.
So what is the difference?
Well, one who wants to fully understand Krishna in truth, but just one who wants to understand, what Hare Krishna is doing, what's there in the Vedic literatures. Because the only way to fully understand knowledge, there's jnana and vijnana. You don't get well, what you say, Shubha. Anyway, so, and he wants realization. He doesn't want just like book learning. Pratyaksha mam dharmam shushukam kartamaryam. Raja Vijay Raja Guyam Pavitram Nidamuttamam. So he actually wants to understand Krishna, not just to understand the philosophy, but to understand Krishna in truth. And so that's the difference. An inquisitive person just wants to understand, what do you Hare Krishnas believe in, what it's all about, it's really interesting. You're dancing in the streets or whatever. Tell me all about it. But one who wants knowledge wants to really deeply understand Krishna and see Krishna. Jnana and vijnana. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Jnana means the knowledge, the book knowledge or the rote knowledge. And vijnana means realization. Probably sometimes called vijnana, scientific knowledge. Isn't it? Scientific knowledge. So, and that's when you really learn about Krishna. Just like if you go to the university, then you have your book knowledge in your laboratory. In the laboratory, you can actually understand what it means to put, hydrogen and oxygen together and you get an explosion. You can understand what it means. Otherwise, what is it? It's just very theoretical. Is that right? So, who else has a question here? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You spoke about retribution, right? So if
Yeah.
if one human being is trying to punish the other human being because maybe something bad was done to him.
Yeah.
In his mind or from his perspective.
Right.
And he wants to punish the other person
Yeah.
in a similar way. Does it mean that? Does it count as good karma? Does it count as like, okay, it's like a tit for tat?
Getting
for
even,
every
getting
action?
even, getting even, so to
Getting
speak.
even, yeah. Does
No,
it-
that's not good karma.
Yeah.
That intention. Actually, there was one theologian in the West who one time said, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and the whole world would be blind and toothless."
Yeah, I mean, I always have some questions around whether this is good karma or not.
No, it's bad karma.
Yeah, and of course, I
And it does.
personally-
All it does is perpetrate the same anger and the same envy and everything like that. It doesn't help the person. I mean, punishment sometimes has to be there,
be there, yeah.
but the intention has to be to help the person,
Yeah.
not to punish them, to make them suffer, because you made me suffer,
So, okay.
because then your mentality. And then also another point is, if someone does something to you and you had no control over it, you also have to see Krishna behind it. If you remember in the Bhagavatam, the story of Dharma the bull and the personality of Kali and Bhumi, the earth planet, you know the story?
I don't
Okay, once upon a time, there was Dharma, who was represented as a bull, and there was Bhumi, who was represented as a cow, and the personality of Kali was basically beating their legs, and the bull was standing on one leg, it's hard to imagine how it was, and urinating, and Kali, who was dressed as one of the modern leaders, prime minister or president or whatever, or king, In those days it was king, but nowadays it would be, modern politician. He was dressed in finery, just like a kshatriya, just like a kshatriya. He was the one who was doing it, and that was the personality of Kali, the predominating deity of this age of Kali. And so Parikshit Maharaj, he comes upon the scene, and he says to Dharma, he wants to do an investigation. He says to Dharma, who has done this to you? And Dharma basically gives different philosophical points, but he says it's very difficult to ascertain. In other words, he doesn't blame Kali. He doesn't say, like we would say, torture him, teach him a lesson. I want to see him suffer because he made me suffer. That's retribution. Because he sees Krishna behind things. And as I mentioned before, that 6:30, when it sees Krishna everywhere, it sees Krishna, and everything never is lost to Krishna, Krishna never lost to him. So and then Parikshit Maharaj says, now I can understand you are the personality of religion, because you have that vision. Whereas most of us would have said, torture him, kill him, like that. And Parikshit Maharaj does get ready to kill him, because he's trying to protect everybody. But then Kali surrenders to him. And so Parikshit Maharaj doesn't kill him at that point, because if someone surrenders, but he still has to rectify him by protecting, he has to protect people. So basically he says, you've got to get out of my kingdom. But the problem is, his kingdom is everywhere. And Kali says, I don't have anywhere to go. You kicked me out of the world, and I can't take a spaceship or go anywhere else. And so then Parikshit Maharaj says, okay, you can go wherever there's, intoxication, eating, gambling, illicit sex. And then Kali says, there's none of that stuff going on. And Richard Mars, all right, wherever there's gold being hoarded for illicit purposes or like that. So you see in that particular story, there's no question of retribution on the part of any of the characters. But there's rectification, or at least a limit to where Kali can have his influence. So it's, yes, I mean, if we hate people, what you're talking about, retribution means hate, basically. That you have some animosity or hate. Then you're in very low modes of nature. It's a mode of ignorance, in fact. A devotee is Jata Shatrava, doesn't have any enemies. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanevana pashati sarvabhuteshu chatmanam tatone gupshate. That's the Upanishad. One who sees everyone connected with Krishna, and you see that people just are in ignorance and they don't know what's best for them. And so you want to help cure the ignorance somehow or other. And you see that with, Haridas Thakur. You've heard of Haridas Thakur. He was beaten in so many marketplaces, 22 marketplaces, and he was praying for the welfare of the people who were beating him. And in the Christian world, you have Jesus Christ who said, "Forgive them, Lord, they don't know what they do." So the devotee is, one of the qualities of a Brahmin is forgiveness. That's mentioned.
Can you come again? I missed
It's forgiveness. One of the qualities of a Brahmin is forgiveness. That's how you can tell if someone's a Brahmin. That if they're willing to forgive someone, or even pray for the welfare of someone who attacks them. Not that they allow themselves to be attacked. I mean, you still got to defend people. You got to defend yourself. That's perfectly normal and natural. Yeah.
Can you forgive someone for the same sin twice?
You forgive them, but you don't forget. You don't let them do the same thing. Yeah. You make sure that they don't do it. You could forgive someone. You may have to take yourself away from the person and no longer deal with the person. Yeah. It's your business to protect yourself. We do not allow ourselves to get abused under any circumstances. But we pray for someone, but sometimes we can't do anything about it. We just stay away. Stay away. I mean, you don't want to stimulate someone's anger, but you don't hate someone. I mean, hating is not in a devotee's mentality, vocabulary. Enemies. Krishna has no enemies. I mean, look at how he deals with people who attack him. He gives them liberation. Isn't it? Yeah. He just gives them liberation. We were just reading the Bhagavatam about the dyer of clothes. And Krishna enters Mathura. And the dyer of clothes was such an obnoxious creep. That Krishna wanted some clothes, and he just called Krishna all sorts of names. And Krishna's just like, okay. Pulls his head off, with his hand. But Krishna gave him liberation. It was an enemy. When in the battle between Ram and Ravan, then you find that Ram honored Ravan after the battle. And Ram honored Indrajit after the battle too. The monkeys, they wanted to defile the body of Indrajit, isn't it? Yeah. But Ram sent the body back with honor. He even covered the body with his own cloth. So he says the animosity is ended with the death here. So I do not find Krishna hating anyone, or God in any of his various expansions hating anyone. So a devotee, I don't find Prabhupada hating anyone. I mean, you can hate illusion or cruelty, the active. There's certain acts you can really hate. Prabhupada certainly didn't like impersonal Mayavad philosophy. But Prabhupada never hated anyone. It's just like, it's not a devotee It's mentality to hate people. And so retribution means you have to hate someone to you want to make them suffer. Like in America, we have this capital punishment. And sometimes the people line up outside of the prison house until someone is actually killed and they have a party. In America, it's called tailgating. I don't know if anyone's heard that expression before. You know what tailgating is?
Yeah.
How do you know?
School.
Oh, school. Okay. Tailgating is called tailgating because they have these pickup trucks. And they sit in the pickup truck having a party. That's what tailgating, a new word in your vocabulary for you. You've been used to it. So they become very joyful when someone suffers. But really, we don't become joyful. We don't want people to suffer. We want people to rectify themselves. And Krishna is the same thing. Although people are suffering, and Krishna reduces it to the most effective means for them to rectify themselves. But there's no question of suffering. People misunderstand like Yamaraj and his punishments and everything like that. And I had some immature devotees look at that or read the 5th canto of Bhagavatam, which deals with all the punishments in the hellish planets, and they just go, isn't that great? Someone gets put through a sugarcane press again and again. That's one of the punishments. Can you imagine? And they don't die or go unconscious. There's no anesthesia. And so they're just like, can you imagine being crushed? Someone has to climb a hill and be thrown off, and they have to climb it again, and all the bones are broken in the subtle body, and they don't go unconscious. It's not pleasant to think about it, but it's to rectify their consciousness. And really, from another perspective, all suffering in this world is due to attachment to the body. It's actually illusory, even though it feels real. When we're in pain, it feels real. But without the attachment, it's not real. It's not, you don't feel it. For example, if I'm sitting here, God forbid, I hear a crash outside, and it's my car, I will feel a lot of pain, anger, and all sorts of things. But if it's one of your cars, it'll be interesting. So that you see how the attachment determines how we experience something, even though in both cases we're different from the cars. Does everyone understand that point? In both cases, we actually have no connection with the cars, other than the false sense of ownership and proprietorship. So it's interesting how it's attachment. Even, of course, the Buddhists understood this quite well. You got the Noble Truths, isn't it? Material world is suffering. Suffering is caused by attachment. Give up the attachment, and that ends the suffering. Then the Eightfold Path. But the point is, we can't give up the attachment until we get attached to something superior. So if we're attached to Krishna, then we can give up the sense of hate and animosity because we want Krishna to be happy. And Krishna's not happy when we hate people. That's the way I think about it. That if someone does something to me, if I'm going to hate them, Krishna's not going to be happy with me. He's not going to hate me, but he's not going to be pleased with me either. Good question. So there were other questions here? Yes?
Maharaj, in the continuation to this, punishment, when one gets the punishment, the sufferings. So when a devotee sees a person is getting punished because of his sinful act,
Yeah.
versus where a devotee cannot see okay, this person cannot be punished, not to be punished so that he cannot see the suffering of that person.
Yeah.
When Shastra says that there are 6 aggressors,
Yeah.
so when it comes to a picture of an aggressor to give them a punishment, how devotee can stand or see if something happened to him with this kind of thing?
Well, the 6 aggressors, this is an interesting point. It was brought up to Prabhupada. someone sets fire to your house, someone who steals your wife, and I forget all the aggressors there. But the punishment, though, that it says they should be killed, basically, in that particular verse. But that is only if you catch them in the act, and it's not premeditated, which is really interesting. In other words, that was brought up to Prabhupada, the same question. There was actually, I hate to tell the story, there was a devotee who had his wife stolen by some other devotee. Anyway, devotees shouldn't steal other people's wives. So anyway, and there was some killing. And they quoted that verse to Prabhupada, saying, Prabhupada, is an aggressor. And Prabhupada said, no, that violence should only be there when you're protecting the person, when the act is happening. But otherwise, it's the government's business to properly punish the person for rectification. And Prabhupada said that person who killed the other person was guilty of murder, even though he was doing it using that particular verse to justify it. So people can misuse verses in different ways. I mean, there's another verse that gets misused quite a bit. My devotee is considered saintly in spite of the most abominable action. You know that verse. So that means that if a devotee accidentally does something one time, then there's forgiveness. But if someone premeditated continually does it, then that verse doesn't apply. So anyway, so that injunction of killing is just for the concept of protection, or stopping the action, like setting a fire, or poisoning it, or stealing one's wife. What are the other three? I forget.
Setting other ones.
Yes, no, I said that. Fire, I said.
I think
Poison,
taking over one's land.
Yeah, property. Yeah, taking of one's property. Fire. I don't remember all six of them. Anyway, whatever it is, yeah, that person can be killed, but that's only in the line of self-defense. That's when that verse is applied, not 2 years after the fact. That you find the person and shoot him or something like that. That's vengeance. Getting even with someone.